Whether you like to do the zero running back strategy in the first and second round, or if you just like to have some more information on how the wide receivers produced in 2021, this video is for you. We're going over the wide receiver consistency numbers. I broke the top 12 down into 3 tiers. Tier number 1 was anybody who finished with a 70% consistency or better. Tier 2 is 60% or better. And Tier 3 is 50% better. Starting in the first tier, ranked number 1 in 2021 was Cooper Kupp. Kupp played in 17 games last season and finished in the top 12 at 94% of the time, which was the best in the NFL by a mile. He finished top 6 82% of the time, 7 through 12 12% of the time, and finished outside of the top 12 just 6% of the time. Kupp lit the football world on fire, breaking records along the way. Finishing in the top 12 at 94% of the time is something that most fantasy owners can only dream of. You can't get more consistent than that. Kupp remains the main focal point of this offense in 2022 and doesn't look to slow down anytime soon. Look for Kupp to be a top wide receiver again this season. Moving on to number 2 for last season was Deebo Samuel. Samuel played in 16 games last season and finished in the top 12 75% of the time. He finished top 6 56% of the time, between 7 and 12 19% of the time, and finished outside of the top 12 25% of the time. Samuel's consistency came largely due to his usage in the run game. With Samuel becoming unhappy with his current role in the offense, wanting to be used more as a traditional wide receiver, you have to expect his efficiency to lower from 75% with the sophomore quarterback at the helm. As of now, Samuel is still on the 49ers. We'll end up seeing if he ends up being traded to another team because that's what he requested to begin 2022. Next, we have the number 3 wide receiver from 2021 in Justin Jefferson. Jefferson played in 17 games last season and finished in the top 12 71% of the time. He finished top 6 47% of the time, between 7 and 12 24% of the time, and finished outside of the top 12 29% of the time. Jefferson has firmly taken over as the number 1 receiver in Minnesota. With Thielen getting up there in age, Jefferson is the go-to receiver for Cousins. Look for him to once again be a consistent monster in 2022. Now let's move on to the Tier 2 and talk about the number 4 wide receiver from 2021 in Davante Adams. Adams played in 16 games last season and finished in the top 12 69% of the time. He finished top 6 44% of the time, between 7 and 12 25% of the time, and finished outside of the top 12 31% of the time. Adams is now with a new quarterback in the NFL, which just so happens to be his old college quarterback. There is a downgrading quarterback here. In Green Bay, he was the only viable option with a receiver at Hall of Fame caliber quarterback throwing the ball. In Las Vegas, he's going to be sharing targets with Darren Waller and having a mediocre at best quarterback throwing him the ball. Look for his consistency to decrease in 2022. Moving on to the number 5 wide receiver from 2021, we have Stefon Diggs. Diggs played in 17 games last season and finished in the top 12 65% of the time. He finished top 6 24% of the time, between 7 and 12 41% of the time, and finished outside of the top 12 35% of the time. Diggs took a step backwards in 2021 from his dynamic 2020 season, but was still solid for fantasy owners. In 2022, Diggs looks to regain his dominance on the field, even with Gabriel Davis coming into his own. There is no question Diggs is the number 1 wide receiver on this team. Now we're at number 6 from last season. Let's talk about Mike Evans. Evans played in 16 games last season and finished in the top 12 63% of the time. He finished top 6 38% of the time, between 7 and 12 25% of the time, and finished outside of the top 12 37% of the time. Mike Evans likes the end zone. He has built a rapport with Tom Brady, and it shows on the field. Evans has been a top 15 wide receiver for years. He is one of the most consistent overall wide receivers on the list. Draft Evans with confidence that you're going to have a stud at wide receiver. Next, we'll be moving on to Tier 3 and talking about the number 7 wide receiver from last season in Chris Godwin. Godwin played in 14 games last season and finished in the top 12 57% of the time. He finished top 6 29% of the time, in between 7 and 12 28% of the time, and finished outside of the top 12 43% of the time. Chris Godwin isn't a lock to start the season. You see, he tore his ACL and sprained his MCL in his right knee on week 15 last season. Look for Russell Gage to fill in more for Godwin, and depending on how Gage does, Godwin could see a reduced role in 2022 upon returning to the field if Gage gets hot. Now on to the number 8 wide receiver from last season in Brandon Cooks. Cooks played in 16 games last season and finished in the top 12 56% of the time. He finished top 6 19% of the time, between 7 and 12 37% of the time, and finished outside of the top 12 44% of the time. Even though he plays for the Texans, he is still the bona fide number 1 wide receiver for this team. He has had 1,000 yards receiving in 6 of his last seasons. This isn't a sexy pick, but it looks like a good pick. For him to play for a Texans team and still be the 8th most consistency wide receiver says a lot about this guy. Now let's move over to the wide receiver who finished number 9 last season in Deonte Johnson. Johnson played in 16 games last season and finished in the top 12 56% of the time. He finished top 6 19% of the time, between 7 and 12 37% of the time, and finished outside of the top 12 44% of the time. This season can go either way. I believe Trubisky is actually an upgrade over Ben Roethlisberger as far as the passing goes. If Trubisky starts over the rookie, you could see Johnson's overall numbers go up, even if consistency drops a bit. Can Trubisky feed Johnson week after week? This is going to have to be the question that we all need to have answered if we're going to be expected to pay a high draft capital for this wide receiver. Next, we have the number 10 wide receiver from last season in DeAndre Hopkins. Hopkins played in 10 games last season and finished in the top 12 50% of the time. He finished top 6 30% of the time, between 7 and 12 20% of the time, and finished outside of the top 12 50% of the time. Hopkins may be suspended for the first 6 games of the season, but when he gets back on the field, he will be a top wide receiver in fantasy. It seems there's a strong connection between quarterback Kyler Murray and Hopkins. Murray knows Hopkins can be counted on when he needs him. Hopkins sometimes seems as his hands are made of glue with some of the catches that he makes and comes down with. His ADP will fall due to the fact that he can't play until week 7. If you could pick him up later in your draft, he should provide a nice boost to your team come mid-season headed towards the playoffs. On to the number 11 wide receiver last season in Mike Williams. Williams played in 16 games last season and finished in the top 12 50% of the time. He finished top 6 31% of the time, between 7 and 12 19% of the time, and finished outside of the top 12 50% of the time. Williams had his best season as a pro last season as he saw 9 touchdowns and over 1,000 yards receiving. It seems that the offense for the Chargers are going to be in a lot of shootouts this season just due to how the division got so much better, which could mean for an increase in consistency numbers for Mike Williams. In the red zone, Herbert looks for Mike Williams. Lastly, let's look over the number 12 wide receiver from last season in Keenan Allen. Allen played in 16 games last season and finished in the top 12 50% of the time. He finished top 6 25% of the time, between 7 and 12 25% of the time, and finished outside of the top 12 50% of the time. As I mentioned about teammate Mike Williams, the Chargers are going to be in a lot of shootouts. Their division is drastically improved. While Mike Williams gives the touchdown guy, Keenan Allen is the possession guy. When they need a big play, Herbert looks Allen's way. Be confident if you end up with Keenan Allen as your wide receiver in 2022. Now let's go over the 2021 wide receiver consistency rankings 1 through 12 all together. We have Cooper Kupp at number 1, Deebo Samuel at number 2, and Justin Jefferson at number 3 to finish out your Tier 1. In Tier 2, we have Davante Adams, Stefon Diggs, and Mike Evans. And in Tier 3, we're going with Chris Godwin, Brandon Cooks, Deonte Johnson, DeAndre Hopkins, Mike Williams, and Keenan Allen. As always, thank you for watching the video. If you aren't subscribed yet, please consider hitting the subscribe button. It helps me out tremendously, and I appreciate you for it. We're going to be dropping videos all throughout this offseason, getting you ready for your fantasy football draft, and ultimately through the season. That way you can dominate your leagues. I can't wait to see you in the next video. We'll see you guys next time.